We just need 1 minute, wait for the camera to start.
Dan, can you give me a thumbs up? You can see the presentation.
You ready?
I can see it. Can you guys see it? Everybody see it? Great.
Okay, we're going to call to order the steering committee meeting for the strategic plan for Walton County tourism. Does anybody in the audience have any public comment at this time? Okay, one thing that has been asked to my fellow council members is that when we're speaking, we identify ourselves in case we cannot be seen on the camera so that they know who is providing what feedback. And with that, we'll turn it over.
All right, we're turning it over to Scott. Dan, you guys go ahead and get us rolling. We appreciate it.
Great.
I would just note, Matt, we can barely hear the speaker. I'm not sure if the microphone is working appropriately.
It's on, Can you hear me now?
A little better. If not, just make
Yeah.
sure that someone can help moderate any Q&A. That would be really important.
Okay, and is that better?
Yeah, a
Dan,
little
a
bit.
little better on my end. On your end?
A little better. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, keep your mics close.
Okay. Well,
Definitely speak into the mic.
and then I'll watch my phone, Matt, so if there's anything you need to text me, just feel free to go ahead and do that. We can make sure and keep that as appropriately as possible. So, okay. So thanks, everyone, for joining the steering committee again today. We've got just, a little bit of brief overview and then some initial findings from all of our sort of local engagement with the steering committee and others we've met with. That sort of is what's created the themes around the SWOT analysis. We've got some initial findings from our reserve policy. We wanted to take a little bit of deeper dive into the event matrix as part of the JLO tools we presented in our initial steering committee, give you a brief update of where we are as we begin our public outreach process, and then talk about the next upcoming steering committee and what we're working on for that meeting. So briefly to review, we reviewed 3 of our tools last time in our steering committee, and again, recognize it was the first time you had seen a lot of this information, and it has and will resurface throughout the course of our work. So the first one was the Tourism Readiness Index, which again was a index where we competitively reviewed a series of data sources about Walton County and the identified competitive set. So while it is a very comprehensive study, there's really a data-driven analysis that creates a quantitative approach to what turns into a qualitative analysis of the information. And it really serves, again, to guide our direction with our stakeholder engagement and future strategy discussions that will come as part of our recommendation. The next tool that we looked at was our event matrix, and we're going to take a deeper dive into that today. But this really looks at the impact of leisure events and helps us define future opportunities to revise strategy, bolster strategy, or look at ways to use events in ways to really drive visitation and drive demand. And the last tool was the demand driver scorecard. We won't take a deep dive into this one today, but obviously this is a very integral part to any mix as you look at what creates demand generation for the destination. And there will be several strategic recommendations that come from this and will serve as the basis for some of the tools we use to evaluate specifically the customer feedback or the public feedback that we receive, and to go through the stakeholder information that we also receive. So quickly, to touch base on what part of the program was to kind of look at this very traditional way of looking at anything, evaluating any sort of program or opportunity, and that was through a SWOT analysis. This particular SWOT analysis was really developed through the stakeholder engagement we had over the course of our first 2 visits, and then on discussions with the staff that we worked with, and a lot of the information that we had developed through the event matrix and the demand driver scorecard. So first, are there any questions you have of the JLL tools or where we are?
I think we're good. Thank you.
Okay. So again, a very traditional way of looking at any situation, any evaluation is through these 4 sort of themes. And I would suspect that none of these themes are completely new to anyone involved in Walton County tourism. I think there are some that really create an opportunity for some further discussion. So what we'll do now is take a deep dive into each of these sections. So the first one is the strength. I think it is clearly one of the most important aspects of Walton County, and that is the natural setting. It was stressed by everyone we spoke to, every time I visited, as well as looking at all of the information that is out there about the destination. It is the pristine nature of the setting that has created such an incredible sense of place for Walton County. There is a very, very strong regional brand. People know the destination, people are familiar with the destination, and you have a very, very strong, loyal visitor base, which we'll also talk to a little bit more in the threats and the opportunities. Clearly, there is a unrivaled presence of luxury opportunity in terms of accommodations in Walton County, especially vis-a-vis your comp set, but also it is a very, very strong part of the brand of Walton County. There is also the very strong support from local planning and development that really protects the character and the natural resources that contribute to this sense of place that is so defined by the natural beauty. And then we have heard from so many and have a lot of information on the strength of the DMO, that Visit South Walton and Authentic Walton, the 2 manifestations of the DMO, are incredibly impactful, very well organized, and include a lot of sophisticated tools in terms of data tracking, the way they benchmark and focus their advertising, and especially their engagement with the community. So let's stop here and see if there's anything that anyone on the steering committee would like to add in terms of strengths or weaknesses, or excuse me, in terms of strengths.
I don't know that I would want to add anything, but I'm somewhat surprised at controlled growth policies coming in as a strength in our county right now. I just would maybe like to hear more about where that feedback, do others feel? We were just having a discussion on our concern over the number of apartment complexes and the fact that many of them are sitting empty. So just a little bit more information on why we feel that's a strength.
Okay. I think what I would say is that part of what we have experienced and found is that there is clearly a local sense of wanting to do more and do better, but vis-a-vis your competitive set and the organizations and communities we've looked at, the idea of the public transportation that the team at Beach Operations is doing, a lot of the work that you're doing in terms of trying to improve beach access, parking access, those are things that are, we think, very, very positive and are not found in all of the other communities that we have done research in and around to support the work we're doing. And there really does seem to be a sense that the long-term sustainability is an active conversation. It's not all solved, but there is the actual conversations and, as you said, discussions going on, which really create this idea that it is an important discussion to have and tools to discuss. Dan, is there anything you'd want to add about that?
Yeah, the only thing I would say, just because if you think about it, remember, is we had the pleasure of also being engaged several years ago, and I just think that there's always been, which is a huge attribute, the focus on really protecting the natural beauty, not creating waves we're all on it, if you will, as others have done. I know that there's all sorts of other opportunities in terms of how we protect our natural resources, but the spirit to us has always sort of been there. I think when it comes to residential, it's an interesting question because when you sort of look at the county in a broader sense, the question would be, are there opportunities we should be noting here related to managing growth or focusing growth or those sort of things? So we're happy to certainly think about that with the steering committee.
This is Tiffany Edwards. I'd almost encourage then, instead of growth policies, to change it to programs, because some of the items that you're specifically addressing seem to be programs as opposed to, it can be misleading
Okay.
on the growth policies
Yeah.
there. Thank you.
Great. We're happy to do that.
Yeah. And there was also, I think, that any destination is on some level the sum of its parts. And there are certain communities within Walton County that do have very defined growth policies and structures. And while they may be very centralized or localized to one community, it does create that character that is, on some level, really important for Walton, is that it is a sum of many parts. It's not just one monolithic experience. And there are various aspects throughout that, or various communities throughout that do have some really structured growth policies or programs.
I guess my question would be, if you expand it, if you sort of look at this county-wide, understanding the tourism nature of the plan, are there any other areas that the steering committee thinks, we need to be thinking about this over the long term in terms of things that should be included here? I mean, there may be other opportunities in other sections, but anything that comes to mind?
I know one thing that comes to mind for me, and I noticed in a lot of this when I reviewed it, you do have a strength, and I certainly now better understand, and I think Tiffany's addition and terminology change would be helpful in that not being confusing, but, you've got controlled
Yeah.
growth policies as a strength and then overdevelopment as a threat. And so I kind of see this issue similarly in that I think it is a strength of Walton County's that we do have exclusive beaches in certain areas. But I think a
Yeah.
threat is the ongoing issues that we have with our beaches. I hate to use the term private, but that's, so I think we need a very focused look at how we turn this currently perceived negative in a lot of areas of Walton County. How do we turn the message and the narrative to a positive? This is a positive
Yeah.
thing that we can offer this guest experience at these locations, and we can offer, but there are available beaches for these other areas of the county,
Yeah.
because I truly do see that as a strength and a threat. I don't know.
Yeah.
And an opportunity. There you go.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think the fact that we, see if everybody agrees with this, but I think that the message is also important that we put the same attention, if that's the right word, towards all beaches. So, meaning we value those that have, if you will, broader access just as much as we do others, and how we demonstrate that, right?
It's a great point.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's move on to weaknesses. Again, don't think there's anything here that is really so unique or so out of context, but clearly there is a seasonal cycle. I think this is common to a lot of destinations. I think it is, again, an opportunity, both an opportunity and a weakness. And this idea that it does create some strain on resources, and also the fluctuations from the impact on staffing and so many other things, that this is clearly a part of a strategic recommendation of how we address this idea of seasonality. Limited access in terms of airports, while this is clearly part of just the development of where the airport infrastructure is, but the strength of your drive market clearly mitigates this, but this is something that we think there's an opportunity in how to talk about the fact that there are two airports that service this destination, as opposed to having limited access is both, again, a weakness and an opportunity. While we've said there are very strong public programs as it relates to transportation, there is clearly the recognition by many, and it came out in our Tourism Readiness Index, that public transportation is minimal, that the walkability score is low. So this is also an area we think provides an opportunity to look at some future strategic adjustments. We heard from a lot of the stakeholders about the workforce shortage, the labor constraints, especially as it relates to affordability for housing and for the workforce. and just the impact of the seasonality and how that impacts workforce. I don't think there was a conversation that we had where the idea of an over-tourism wasn't a discussion, whether it was a discussion about a concern or about how over-tourism connects to seasonality, but this idea on how it creates strain on the infrastructure, potential environmental pressures during high season, and especially the impact felt by the residents and the people who value the pristine nature of the natural environment. And then clearly, a very important topic was the lack of off-beach tourism-related infrastructure. And clearly, the opportunity, as defined by almost everyone we met with, was that above the bay lacks a strategic direction for demand drivers for visitation. Let's stop here again and get some feedback and think if there's some other opportunities that we should discuss here in terms of the weaknesses.
Let me just ask one question here on that kind of relates to the first bullet point and I guess the fourth, and that is just looking over the span of, let's say, last 5 years, and then thinking about the future when it comes to the whole seasonality and peaks and valleys. I mean, any thoughts here? You know, we always look at planning process as a chance to sort of pause and think about this, but any thoughts related to either more opportunities to manage, if you will, peak periods as it relates to the feedback that we get, and we got before too, related to, you know, the impact of quote unquote over tourism or when we're really busy. So that's one question, is are there thoughts there, things that we should be thinking about, things that the steering committee has thought about that this planning process might advocate for that would help us in that sort of area. And then they definitely want to talk about the off-beach one also, but just on that kind of, you know, how do we manage the demand in the peak times with, you know, the residents and with everybody that's involved there? Any thoughts there as to, you know, any other things that could be considered here or that the committee has thought about even over the years related to this issue?
I think based on a lot of what you shared with the intent of the control growth programs, I think as these additional parking facilities finish up, all the things that beach operations presented in our earlier meeting, all the effort that has been made, the dollars being expended, this is all in that vein. And I think once that stuff is completed, we will have made major strides to relieve that.
That's great.
To relieve that issue, is my opinion.
Which is great. Okay.
Daniel, real quick, I would also, you know, this is not specific to seasonality, but kind of a similar thought. There's, you know, we've maybe enjoyed and suffered through at the same time a very conventional, we've had a very kind of standardized way that people visit our beach over the summer. That's Saturday to Saturday terms, and there's some great things associated with that, and there's also some challenging things associated with that, including, you know, arrival days and trash and operations and everything in between. And, you know, I think COVID has kind of forced us to, you know, reevaluate that, or, you know, kind of encouraged our prospective guests to, you know, force us to reevaluate that, right, just with people, the way people are traveling now. But I think that's something to consider as well. I think it's a strength and a weakness, the way we've always approached that, but there's definitely opportunities there.
Yeah, point there being, you know, just how do we continue to try to, if you will, you know, support the way that the, you know, the almost ingress egress. I mean, how do we support different ways to, is that what you're trying to drive? Which I think is a good one, you know, and could there be more opportunity to educate the visitor, if you will, around this? Is that part of that, what the possibilities might be there?
Let me add a little bit different, maybe take on Dan's question. I think one of the things that was, I think, clearly evident is that the past visitation was always structured around a week visit. Everybody in on the same day, out on the same day. And I think as you look at the future, there may be an opportunity, as defined by the changes in travel, to change that traditional way of visiting. Again, arrival day Sunday, departure day Saturday, and the strain that has on the resources. So is that something that you all see as well, is that is also changing, or do you anticipate that as a possible opportunity?
So Tiffany Edwards, I think that it's already changing, and I think that the consumer, not just here, but all over, is changing. I think there's several add-ons to that as well. And what I would ask is, when we have our other workshops with other stakeholders, I'd like to drive down a little bit more about what the pressures are based on that seasonality and those peaks. So is it garbage? Is it water concentration? What are the concerns from the county? I know that we've mentioned even like, the sheriffs or whatever it may be, but what's the actual concentration and concern during those real big peaks? And then I think that the other side of it is in that opportunity for that year-round programming. I do think that because our guests are coming for shorter periods of time and not necessarily on that Saturday to Saturday, and our flights are changing to provide that opportunity, I'd like to see us focus a lot more on those year-round programming and having some of those longer weekends for people to come in. But I just don't, in terms of a seasonality, to your question earlier, Daniel, I just want to know a little bit more about what those pressures are before I could address what the solutions might be.
Yeah.
That would be a very, very easy addition to add to the future stakeholder engagement. And I think we can circle back. We can certainly come back to many of the stakeholders we've met with and have those conversations. I don't think it would be incredibly burdensome. I would hope it wouldn't be too burdensome to come back for another 10 to 15-minute conversation on what those pressures are, especially of that the impact on that the pressures from those peak times.
And Tiffany, again, I'll add on that too for the limited accessibility. Obviously, we're not going to be creating another airport, but I would say to drive in a little bit more on the experience. So how long does it take to get your baggage? How can you get a car? Is it easy for you? What's that first initial experience, and how do we partner with those locations to make that an easier process to get your flights to not, whatever that may be?
Great.
Yeah, I think we did clearly have sort of envisioned this idea that there is a way to position this as with the geography of Walton County, that there are two options, not one, as a real core positioning statement, which I think is already at its genesis, but can, I think, really kind of raise to the forefront of the accessibility discussion. And again, having done that now 3 times, I can assure you it is a great, I was flying into ECP. It is a very, very efficient and quick airport to get in and out of and get a car. And my personal experience would seem to indicate that there's a lot of opportunity there to share that with a lot more people.
And then just real quickly, Scott, before we get off of this last one here, and maybe Matt, you can jump in here too. We definitely have, almost out of the gate, in terms of starting to engage here, look at this whole question of off-beach strategy, let's call it, right? Sort of, obviously there's a focus where there's a focus, but we have thought about and would love to get, I think the steering committee is going to play a key role here in how we think about kind of level of investment, level of, if you will, resource, let's call it, that we would want to start thinking about when it comes to off-beach experiences. And starting to look at, because in a lot of cases, some of the areas that we've looked at, this would be developmental in nature. It would be trying to encourage even small business engagement in some of the districts, or different things to get involved with to try to see if we can start to move towards more opportunity for visitation, in other parts essentially of the county. And what does the steering committee think about that in general? And then maybe, Matt, you can jump in here too, just how we might start to approach this in a thoughtful manner, because I think we think there could be, and it may be a medium or longer term opportunity, but do we start looking at that as part of this process and really thinking about where we might go from here?
Yeah, I think that's really where, we want a piece of the conversation to go, Dan, is what opportunities for developing a further product within the destination can we identify, or do we think we need to identify moving forward, as we understand that, the beach is always going to be the main draw and the reason people come here, but what are those supporting activities, amenities that we might be able to, say, guys, look, here's really where we should turn some focus to in terms of destination development. Is that, paddleboarding infrastructure? Is that, getting on board with the idea of, a marina? What are those things that we can talk about and identify from a tourism standpoint that would not only give our visitors additional opportunities to enjoy while they're here, but also things that can help drive the economy and move the business community forward as well? And where do we see our role in that endeavor?
What are thoughts here?
Events. I mean, I know we'll dive into that a little bit more, but I think, I would like, whenever we do talk about the events, also think about what Okaloosa and Bay County are doing, so we are positioning ourselves in a more favorable and diversified position.
I missed some of that, but so the thought may be that even in the event strategy, maybe there's an opportunity to look at locations. Is that, I'm not trying to, that kind of
Yes.
what you're saying there?
That would be the direction for that specific.
Again, they were referring to the two counties on either side and the elements they have in terms of events and event venues and event strategies. So they were referring to Okaloosa and Bay County, which are the counties that border Walton County.
Correct.
Yeah.
And those particular are more favorable for that off-season peak time frame that would help in the potential opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts here?
Jennifer?
Yeah, I was going to add infrastructure for events, but one thing that is top of mind for me, because I just saw a video on Instagram last night, and it had to do with customary use and conflict on the beach, and I know Amy brought it up as an opportunity, but I think I think that lack of control of perception is a weakness and a threat. So I think we need to address, from a marketing perspective and messaging perspective, how we can turn that into an opportunity and a strength, because there's so much that we can't control. What can we control?
And the only other thing that I would add is I certainly see merit and opportunity in several of the things that are being looked at this point, i.e. a sports complex, i.e. a marina. The problem is we're going to need to entice private enterprise on some of this stuff. That's to me, the answer. I don't think Walton County or the TDC is necessarily going to be able to find the funding for these massive projects, but I think if we could entice private enterprise, I think these things could be hugely successful. So that, I certainly think it's something that we need to keep on our radar screen. I think it's something the people of Walton County are asking us to keep on our radar screen. But I really see the opportunity there. How do we reach out to some of these folks running some of these very successful marinas and other things, and how do we entice them to look at Walton County and say, hey, this is a big opportunity?
Yeah, look, can I just say one thing on that? It's a great comment, and Matt, maybe you can jump in here too, because I think that just to use that example, part of the outcome of the planning process could be to say, and I'm going to use the term resource, so it may be just internal and board and sort of time here, but just saying that there is a priority here to try to put some focus on what you just brought up, and try to enticing private development. Because I think, Matt, you'd agree, it hasn't necessarily historically not been there, but the idea might be in this planning process to be a little bit more clear and say, we want to see these things happen in the future, and we do see organizationally an opportunity to invest some time, maybe not dollars, but time in trying to, sort of work on what you just brought up, which is a great example.
Yeah, and I think that's more kind of the conversation is, what are these projects, what are these initiatives that we feel, as the tourism stakeholders and leaders of the county, that would be beneficial to the county overall, not necessarily that, we are going to fund them, but that we advocate for them and we ensure that we have the seat at the table when those conversations are being had.
Right, exactly. which we may not, Matt, historically have, not because we didn't want to, but it wasn't necessarily a priority per se, right? Great.
And I think in terms of the conversation, it can be a continuum. There are some low-hanging fruit that can really be addressed through an event strategy, and at the same time, a longer, sort of long-term opportunity discussion that takes into account this last conversation about being at the table, enticing and working with private development. But I think it's not an and/or. I think it's definitely an and, where all of these things can happen along this continuum of a strategy for the future.
Yeah, agreed, Scott. And real quickly, I would encourage us not to, and I think there's different time horizons on some of these different topics, but I would encourage us not to lose sight of some of our immediate needs, right? I think, it's nice to talk about, diversifying product, right, and looking inland and looking at different opportunities for ecotourism and some of the things in the Bay and north of the Bay. And I think it's fun to talk about year-round programming, but, at the end of the day, our highest impact and the most important stays that we have for leisure travel here are peak summer, right on the beach. And I would caution us not to lose sight of the opportunities that we have there in favor of, and again, I know different timing, but I think we got to focus on, we keep calling them our bread and butter guests, right, that are going to make or break each summer. That house that does $10,000 a week, in the summertime is what moves the needle, right? Not that same house, 3-night stay in the middle of, December for some wine festival, right, may generate $1,000 a week, right, for a long weekend or something. So I would caution us to make sure that we're focused on not just the low-hanging fruit, right, but the high-impact fruit as we go.
Great.
My mentor used to say, keep the main thing the main thing. Is that the theme of what we just talked about?
Agreed.
Okay, into opportunities. Again, I think some of this we've talked about through this discussion of the weaknesses and the threats. So this idea of product diversification, expanding inland tourism offerings, talking about different aspects of tourism, but also this idea of how we spread visitor beyond the beach. And again, very cognizant, not at the expense of the real bread and butter guests, but again, in addition to, and what strategies can we put forward for consideration that would address this? The sustainable, resilient tourism leadership. This is really an opportunity we see to position Walton County based on the incredible reputation of the natural environment and how to position what you are doing with beach operations and what you are doing with infrastructure, the conservation efforts that are at play. I know I can say this definitively. In all the research I have done and the communities I've worked with, I have never seen the leadership that exists currently with this team, and I think it is a position to really talk about Walton County in a way that ties it so directly to the natural environment that is a part of it. Off-peak programming, this idea of how we use events, festivals, conferences, meetings, and other aspects of tourism to really drive off-season visitation. Again, as an and, not an or. Investment of infrastructure. How do we look at ideas around north of Bay, what can enhance the transportation, bike trails, master parking, all of which could include both the way that the off-season visitor experiences it, or drive demand for off-season, but also how the bread and butter guest experiences it. And last, for a collaborative strategy amongst all of the various aspects of the industry to leverage a destination-wide visitor data strategy that really focuses on personalizing to improve your marketing efficiency. And I think this really comes to its fruition as you look at how to engage and make sure that your bread and butter guest feels informed, understands everything that's going on that can meet their changing needs, but also ensure that Walton County stays as viable and as real as an option for them as can be. And I think this is something that is currently not done very well in the industry, that each respective part of the community has access to and knowledge of local visitation. I think there's a very strong opportunity for a collaborative approach to this that could redefine the sense of community that is Walton County with a very direct and focused marketing opportunity that really looks at that idea of how do you send the personal message to the right person at the right time that really delivers on the value proposition that has always existed and continues to exist and drive so much of what happens in Walton County. So I don't know, Matt, if you had any ideas on this idea of positioning the leadership of sustainable and resilient actions that you're taking, but from all the things that I have seen, it is a real opportunity for the community.
Yeah, all I would add is to your point, Scott, I do think there's an opportunity to, make a greater emphasis on, the idea of sustainability and understanding the fragile nature of our ecosystem here, right? I think what we all understand is we have finite natural resources, and, as the, individuals who work and live in this community, I think we need to have an active role in, ensuring the longevity and the protection of those resources.
Great. Any additional thoughts here?
Looks like we're good.
Okay.
Okay. And then into the threats, which I think we all recognize that are an ongoing and very real part of living in the environment where you do. The idea of how overdevelopment and can erode this natural asset and will lead to and create more resident pushback. There's always a threat of an economic downturn, and as a leisure-first destination, this is probably more acute in Walton County than in others that also rely on the meetings and events market. Competition is clearly a threat. There's growing investment, as noted earlier in the discussion, especially in the sports market. In counties on either side, there's significant assets being built there, and that could dilute future market share. The decreasing ability to maintain current repeat client base. Heard from several stakeholders the push and pull of the rising accommodation costs and how that creates a shift in appeal, and the idea of how the increased expense of marketing of attracting new visitors, meaning versus keeping your repeat guests, that is a real threat to the ecosystem, and that as we have seen over the last year, that there's some real potential threats that come from regulatory shifts. State level policy can really impact the tourism environment in Walton County. So throw it back to the steering committee, see if there's anything here that we need to take a little bit deeper dive on, or additional threats that you can see that we should take into consideration as we build out the basis of our recommendation.
Tiffany Edwards, I'll add in, and I don't know if this specifically goes into threats, but one of the concerns I have is the ongoing expenses of the parks that we, as a TDC, help purchase some of these, new projects and then ongoing, and I don't know to what extent we kind of budget that, and then it goes into the county budget, and that is definitely a part of the experience overall for our guests. And so having a longer term understanding of what the facility costs would be, especially as we start to purchase new facilities.
Okay.
I think my comment is along those same lines. I listed as, I apologize, I didn't know we were completely done with opportunities, but I had listed education, which has been of the local community, which has been an opportunity since the first time I served on this council. It's just, we continue to be the most misunderstood, probably, organization. How you can use these tax dollars is very regulated, and I don't remotely have an answer. But one of the things that comes to my mind, because it's been hot in our inboxes, is this entire issue with Legion Park. And I did go take a look at the park. I was not able to attend the meeting, but Walton County tourism is a brand. And so the things that we own have to represent our brand. And so without question, something has to be done there. It isn't in the plan, I know that. But there's also a misperception that it's a local park. And so if it's not a local park, it's a TDC-owned asset that we have a fiduciary responsibility, in my opinion, to enhance and maintain. So if there's, any efforts we could make to make sure folks understand what the TDC is, what our dollars can be used for, et cetera.
That's great. Going back to that point about people's understanding of sort of what we do, the only comment I'd make is, we have been talking about, obviously, this sort of interface with residents on, getting their thoughts and that sort of thing, which is always an interesting, process to try to do that and, and actually create either questions or things that will cause somebody to actually tell you what they're thinking or give you a sense of this. So, I know that this is something we want to keep looking at in terms of how we communicate and what's the type of messaging. Should be interesting to have the steering committee think about is, what's the type of messaging that will really resonate with a resident? Sometimes we get very used to in the industry sort of throwing out data and economic impact things, and we find sometimes that when we really look at how impactful that is, sometimes it's not that impactful, right? And are there other messages that we could all be thinking about in terms of some of the great things that are being done that we could convey that would give the community a better sense? Or I don't know if any of the committee members have thoughts on this, but, could we think about the type of messaging that would be either more impactful or reinforce or educate, but do it in a way that actually sort of works for someone who is getting up every day, not necessarily thinking about tourism every day, right? So any thoughts there just in that area?
I think we're good.
Okay, we'll keep thinking about that. Great.
Daniel, real quick, I have a couple thoughts on that, and just kind of expanding on, what Amy was saying a minute ago. I think overall, maybe this is a weakness or maybe a challenge as well that we need to consider, is that there's not a lot of cohesion between the tourism department, the TDC, and our community, right? Whether we're talking about residents or we're talking about the bed tax collector community. I think, as Amy, kind of couched it as education, I think there needs to be some outreach as well. There's not a lot of trust, I think, between the bed tax collection community and what the county is working on at any point in time. I think there's definitely an opportunity there to kind of build a little more cohesion, a little more collaboration, between what the county is doing in the community. It's definitely something I would keep on the radar.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to keep. With matter of fact, as Scott's mentioned, some of these we want to keep the conversation going throughout the check-ins here to think about what that messaging could be, because I think it's an interesting area. We of course think about this in other places too, and trying to really think about what causes that person. I use that persona of someone who's getting up every day and working in a different industry and doesn't necessarily think about tourism until something occurs, and then they go, I don't understand, or I don't know why, or I don't understand that priority, and how can we do this in a way that actually kind of resonates, right? And I don't know if you guys agree, but sometimes the big sort of economic numbers, if you're not living and breathing this every day, they don't necessarily always click, in terms of going, okay, great, well then that's why we're investing here. So thinking about other messaging, right, that could be more impactful going forward, right? I think it's a good one, right, to think about and start strategizing on. I don't know, Matt, if you want to add to that. I know we're working on a survey right now, but I think it's a great point that we want to make sure that as part of this planning process, we can come out with some, thinking and consistency and maybe even, cadence here and what that looks like too. So, Matt, I'll maybe turn over to you for a few thoughts here too.
Yeah, I think those are all very valid points. I think, one of the things we've been talking about internally is how do we get that communication out more effectively and to the right audiences. Just of note, one of the things that we've re-implemented, and gosh, we've been trying to do this for a year and a half now with varying levels of success, is reorganizing our small group gatherings. We've recently sent out outreach to all of our accommodations partners in addition to all of our business contacts as well to re-energize those groups. And we've got a good number of people who have reached out with interest to sign up for those. So we're kind of waiting to get through the holiday, and then we're putting those meetings out to interested parties so we can get the community and input from those who want to participate in our small groups.
Great.
Brian, do you see some of this, what you discussed from a bed tax collector community? You couched it as trust. Would some of this be knowledge, or do you think it's a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both, and I think it comes and goes in waves. I think we're probably on an upswing at the moment, but there's been periods of time over the last couple of years where I would say that there's probably not a lot of collaboration or, trust between the communities. It's just something to keep on the radar. I think, I think that as we're working together, right, as an industry and as a community, we're certainly better off.
I think there is a distinctly different strategy from a communication, information sharing with the bed tax community versus the public, and how there can be some commonality amongst the bed tax community, what the goals are, and then impact of the community. So just want to make sure I understood that, because I think that is a really important additional consideration to take as we continue our stakeholder engagement, is how do we look at that subset of the audience, or that audience that makes up the TDC, in a sense, that bed tax community, bed tax collector community, excuse me.
Great. Okay.
Okay, well, so we're going to leave the swap
one-
portion and move into the reserve
real quick.
policy
Hey,
and
Scott.
our initial sort of overview and discussion on what we've
Hey, Scott, I think
Scott.
Brian had one more thought.
Hey,
Okay.
real quick, just one
Okay.
last thing for me on threats. The last item there is regulatory shifts, and it notes state level policy change. But I think Amy actually brought this up earlier. I think there's the potential for local level policy to be as impactful, if not more impactful, than state level changes. I know we've got some ordinance work going on here, and I think it's well intentioned, but there are probably going to be some unintended consequences and maybe some inefficiencies that we as a community have to work through. So just something to keep on the radar.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you.
No, I think that's a good point. I think I over-indexed on the state policy simply because that was the hot topic when I was there, but I think it is regulatory shifts in general. And I can speak from personal experience that oftentimes it is the local policies that are far more impactful than state policy. So we will make sure and add that to our threats as well, and find a way to create an opportunity around that. Okay, so far, as sort of a broad overview, we sort of have come up with sort of 4 areas that create considerations for a reserve strategy. What I've been able to uncover is there are clear guidelines for the county and therefore the TDC board in terms of how it manages a reserve and what the policies are. So I think our recommendation is going to look much more like a strategy versus a policy, because there is clearly existing policy that describes how reserves are managed, how reserves are delivered and executed at the board level. So there's 4 main areas. Again, don't think these are huge aha moments, but just to let you know sort of what we've sort of looked at in terms of the needs and what creates the opportunities for reserves. Obviously, revenue volatility, crisis preparedness. Often this is referred to as the event or rainy day fund. I'm not sure I really like the term rainy day, but I will try. We have some language to kind of maybe exchange for that, but it is sort of what most people call the rainy day. That's the natural disaster that are clearly a part of planning for any destination or community that has such a direct connection to the environment, and an environment that has the volatility that your environment does. One that I think is really forward-looking, and one that I think is an opportunity for Walton County, is the idea of being flexible from a strategic perspective. So how can you use the reserve strategy to enable this idea of rapid investment in opportunities or events that really are just that, an opportunity from a strategic perspective. And then as you look at moving forward, while it's not, well, it is clearly part of Walton County that there is infrastructure that Walton County Tourism does manage and operate. The typical DMO may not be in this environment. So looking at other examples and other destinations, while there's not a ton of destinations to evaluate, there are clearly ones that look at this through the idea of a capital reserve type of a strategy, looking at really this idea of how you ensure that this asset stays viable for the future. And when you combine this idea of strategic opportunity reserve with capital reserve, we think there's an opportunity there for a strategy for Walton County because you do own assets. And how do you look at developing and protecting opportunities for just that, responding to strategic opportunities in the future? So as we look at sort of some ways to define these various strategies, these are again looking at, as we look at the policy, that there are many communities that operate with what's called an operational reserve. A lot of times this is also called a cash reserve, where you have the opportunity within a destination to have some volatility in your operating expenses. So at the end of a cycle, there may be funds that are in excess of what was budgeted, or sometimes overspend. And oftentimes, this operational reserve is used in this way in a very short-term but yet strategic way to make sure that the budget cycles all match up on a line. Then you have this idea of this future-looking opportunity reserve. And again, while this is generally funded through the annual budgeting process, it tends to tie to a very future-looking strategic goal that may not be actualized or experienced during that annual budget cycle. And then as we look to the future, again, from a capital infrastructure reserve, these are reserves that are really set aside to protect and ensure that the future asset is, again, managed properly and managed with the future in mind. So this is to keep the strategy here with this type of reserve is to keep this asset relevant for the future. And then coming to the idea that a reserve policy that has a defined set of resources that are used to respond to very, very large events. Again, these can be emergency marketing events, post-hurricane, a recovery program, and can also be restoration programs that are very necessary to rebuild the product. The last one is one that is often set aside for the use of things like multi-year contracts or workforce development issues where the community, the TEC board, through the lens of the DMO, will create a program that has more than just one budget cycle that it impacts. So there is this idea of how you designate reserves to impact that strategy that keeps it funded for the duration of the strategy, so you don't have this problem where you start something very important and then lack the funding for future years to make sure that it comes to fruition. So are there any questions about these sort of 5 areas of policy that we're evaluating right now as it relates to your strategy at Walton County?
Anything we're missing here or we should make sure is fed into these considerations?
I think my only question might be, or observation, is how we would fit, and maybe this might even be more of a Clay, how we would fit this into how our reserves are currently by penny allocated for certain things. How does this work with that?
Yeah, and that's
Right.
going to come in our recommendation. We will show you how we see those aligning. This was to kind of right set on some terminology so that you could kind of get a sense of when we make our recommendations, they will be in sort of these 5 general categories, or I guess what we're calling strategies.
So the short answer there, Madam Chair, would be that this would become your reserve policy. Right now, the allocation by penny is a tool of convenience.
Okay.
And I do encourage, let me say this, I'm probably going to always be of the mindset that that is a tool of convenience we should use. But at a certain point in time, we can't say, well, it's our tool of convenience and it's also the only way we look at our budget. We have an overall budget. We know so much money comes out of Beecher Nourishment. Ultimately, if this is where you're going, this should become your reserve policy. that should then
Yeah.
be applied across the whole budget. To the extent
Gotcha.
that you may have some overarching control mechanism, beach renourishment as an example, that we have to allocate the money for, that is something separate and completely aside from what we're talking about here. It may fall well within one of these buckets, but that's a mandated obligation. This is more of where you choose to put your money for either the strategic reserve, the capital improvement reserve funds. That's what you get to choose. So I would look at this more as where your discretion lies than what is dictated right now. And I won't say wholly ignore the penny concept, but look at it across the whole budget. So I think that's the way you would fit this in to make it work. And then you can always back it out. 1 penny equals this, because every penny equals the same amount of money. How we
Right.
spend it's different.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very good feedback, and I think very aligned with sort of what we're looking at in terms of the scope and scale of the current level of assets in the reserve, and building a strategy that will develop for the TDC a policy. And I was kind of being careful on those two terms because I didn't want to imply that we didn't see any policy. There clearly are policies that do dictate how reserves are done within the structure of Walton County and the state of Florida. But they're clearly, these can become the TDC policy, and that is sort of the way we will create the recommendation that comes from this work we're doing. One of the things we were asked was to look at some other ones. And so I think I'm just going to use Galveston Island for an example of what we've sort of found through most of the work looking at the other communities that are going to be in some similar type of an environment and structure and market mix, and that is the vast majority of the reserve policies are very, very reactionary. There isn't a lot of them that tie to future strategy. And I think what we just heard was that having that idea of what future strategy looks like will really help drive our recommendation of what a reserve policy can look like. And I think what I would just stress here is that it does feel like the impact of natural environments, while unknown, are clearly part of a future strategy. But how and at what level they are funded, I think, is what really is going to create the distinction of this recommendations that we're making, that there is much less of a reactionary look at it and what happens if, as opposed to if we build the strategy right and build these reserves, we will be able to structure a response that is always tied to the future strategy of the organization rather than always be in the reactionary mode with our reserves. And I think that hopefully will also build into the strategy this idea of how the TDC board responds to those emergencies when they happen and having that baseline of a strategy, a forward-looking strategy to use as an evaluation tool. Are there specific other communities that you think we should look at? We've got a great list from Matt and the team in terms of destinations that are, again, very similar in types of the nature of the product, the market mix. So is there anyone specifically you want us to try to interact with?
Yeah, I think they're all happy with what we've identified.
Great. We will continue to move on. So today we want to take a little bit of deeper dive into the event matrix. Again, we had a very cursory overview of what that was, but want to take the opportunity to look at really kind of two strategies. And this is a gross oversimplification of it, but from a lot of the work that we do, there are two maybe big buckets that the event strategies are sort of aligned with. One is using an event strategy to make sure that there are always things to do, that there's activities throughout the year, peak times, off season, and the event strategy is one that, again, is really defined as creating an opportunity year-round for things to do. So it doesn't matter what time of year, that there's always something going on, keeping a consistent model, and again, many destinations subscribe to that type of an event strategy. The other one is using events to really drive and build opportunities in off-season or off-peak times. So this event strategy is very different in that your resources are not allocated as a slow drip across a wide range of dates. They are very, very specific to dates and types of events that can really bolster off-season activity that, again, align to brand, align to the need, capacity of the destination. And it is really hard in the world where there are finite resources to have an event strategy that tries to serve both. Because they are, again, while they have very different outcomes, they are also very different in the way that they are supported, managed, and structured from an evaluation perspective. So our event matrix, again, looked at 10 different aspects of events, and then had a bonus that added additional scoring points if this was in a need year, a need time of the year. And while there are 10 here, there are ones that are weighted higher, which we'll go through in just a minute, that have more impact. But as you can see, this is a broad-ranging set of criteria that looks at everything from uniqueness to are there additional partnerships to does it align with the target market for the destination? Does it generate overnight stays? Is it beneficial, a lift to the destination brand, or is it just another X? Is it just another one of things that everyone has and everyone sort of looks at in terms of their event strategy? Are there any questions on the criteria that you've seen from the last time or this time?
I just want to add one piece based on the conversation we had just, a little ago here. And that is with the dynamics of us here, with the dynamics of the county, there might be an interesting piece here to also sort of add, if you will, or at least contemplate as we think about strategy. And that is, the sort of quality of life question. So in some cases, also saying to ourselves, this is an event that is great from a soft period tourism perspective, but maybe it also has a positive impact within the community, or maybe it, we need to think about it from that perspective, or the earlier conversation about potentially events about sort of off-beach, if you will, events, is there kind of a potential dual role there in terms of trying to drive visitation, but also being a benefit to the community? So I don't know, just food for thought based on some of the earlier conversations to think about, if that makes sense to the committee.
Tiffany Edwards, I have a quick question. The evidence of partnerships, what exactly were you looking for in terms of who are you targeting as the partners and identifying and then creating that max value? Is it local? Is it national?
Yeah, that means about number 4 there, evidence of partnership.
Yes.
The nature of that was to try to see if the event organizers had connected with potential local partners, could be chambers, could be, frankly, us, could be others in terms of how they're structuring their approach, right? So we can kind of see how has the event, if you will, assimilated almost within some of the key local players or local partnerships. And it also ties to, one of the goals in the event matrix is to also look at the kind of sustainability of the event in terms of, who they're partnered with and what they're doing. So that also plays in that space when we look at, what potential partners they're working with.
It's both a quantitative and a qualitative question. Are there more than one sponsor? So if the only evidence of this partnership is Walton County Tourism, then that scores very low in this evaluation. If, however, there are a lot of partnerships and they have a very large list of sponsors and program partnerships, then the next sort of qualitative look at that is, are these those embedded in the community and have a sense of the community as part of their overall support of this particular event? So it is, again, both quantitative and qualitative. And when you score a 5, you are able to demonstrate that your event, and most of this is desktop research done, online, looking at the event website, as well as contacting and reaching out to the event organizers, where you see that they have again, a plethora of sponsors and partners, and then those partners are connected to some element of the community, would create the idea of a higher score.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So as you then create the idea of scoring, it then relates to a categorization. So we have 6 levels of categorization in terms of local, fairly connected, mostly connected, tourism demand generator, very sort of compelling, and then most compelling. And those are then categorized into level of interest and done by the rating. So as you can see here, when we look at the weight, our tool weights the destination impact on the tourism brand, a comprehensive approach to marketing of the event, and overnight stay generation, and then the bonus of time of year as the most impactful parts of an event strategy. While event partnerships, again, had a score of 1 to 5, it's only weighted as a 2 in terms of its overall impact. So while very, very important and strategic in terms of evaluating each event, its weight is lower in perspective to the other elements of the index.
Okay.
So as we went through, there were 24 events that we evaluated and scored. 5 of those events were viewed as a national draw, and we'll get down to those specifics in just a moment. So 20% of them. And the majority of these were regional draws or must-see if you're in the area. So again, these are events that create opportunities for things to do for people that are there. While they're there, they're going to see it, but they wouldn't necessarily fall into that categorization of drawing demand to the destination outside of the region. So here are those events and the way they have ranked to our metrics. I would note that, again, one example, while the Emerald Coast Blue Marlin Classic, by almost every measure, was the largest event, it scored very low in the bonus category of time of year because it's during peak season. So that's one of the reasons why the Emerald Blue Coast Classic would be different than the 38 Songwriter. And then you can see there are a whole series of wine and food festivals that are, again, a very, we think, organic part of what happens with the event strategy. But most of these fall into that category of, national, regional draw, and they all had some levels scored very high in time of year, in sense of brand impact, and then all the way down to the other end where you see things like the South Walton Concert Series, you see the Bloody Mary Festival, these things that, again, are festivals and events that are part of the community, but not necessarily drawing visitation from a national or even a regional perspective.
So when you look at can everybody see this list okay? I mean, when you look at the list, anything jump out at you where you kind of go, boy, I thought that would rank higher or lower, or I didn't say higher, because there's no better or worse here, but just, where you see things kind of shake out here, where you go, it's interesting. And any just initial observations when you're looking at some of these?
Tiffany, again, I think at first blush, the top being mostly adult-centered events. And I know Amy mentioned it in the last steering committee meeting, that trying to focus on more family and teen-friendly. And while we have some of the family-friendly up there, I do think that is an opportunity, because most of these are for adults.
Right. That's a good one. Any other observations there, other things when you look at the event, you think, here's where I might have placed that, or any, because that's part of the conversation is to look at this and then sort of get that feedback, keep kind of adjusting this, but then also work with the, kind of internal team, as was mentioned earlier by the steering committee, on which ones of these, if they're off-season or if they have specific characteristics that we want to put more emphasis in, from an organizational perspective, is also part of the outcome here.
Daniel, what is the goal of this evaluation, of this list of events?
Yeah, it's really from this perspective, from the steering committee's perspective, it's to go, okay, great, everybody kind of looks at how, events are sort of evaluated. It also gives the internal team a tool when they talk to future event organizers. But most important, from a strategy perspective, if you think about some of the things we talked about earlier, on strengths and weaknesses and focuses, let me give you one example. If one of the outcomes of this is, what's the strategy for that sort of year-round and that focus on, let's say, softer periods, let's just say, for example. And some of these events hit in those softer periods, and we see potential based on kind of how they were scored. One of the outcomes would be the steering committee would support the notion with the internal team of putting more, I'm going to use the term resource, because it isn't necessarily dollars per se, but putting more focus in some of the events that strategically, fulfill some of the priorities that we have. One example could be off period, right? So that would be an example of an outcome here. And one of the reasons why we put this together years ago is we think that in a lot of cases, people look at events almost in a reactive sense. So event organizer comes up with an idea, they come to our team, our team tries to be helpful, but there isn't necessarily a focus on which events are the ones that make the most sense in terms of specific focus. So essentially, you end up with a list like this and you boil it down to those that sort of fit, if that just makes sense, into the larger strategy. And then you try to say, okay, how do we continue to cultivate that event going forward? Does that make sense, just as a reason for doing this, right?
Got it. Makes sense. I would encourage us, if this is going to kind of become the gospel, so to speak, for events to kind of focus on, not to focus on going forward, we probably want to spend some time and vet this list. It's ironically, this is something we've been having a lot of conversations recently on events in the community, just for some other topics going on at the moment. I would, Matt, your team, Kelly, I would probably encourage y'all to get very much involved and kind of maybe put some additional, set eyes and perspective on these. I love kind of the objective approach to evaluating these. I think there's a lot of nuances to these that I think we want to be really, really careful. I mean, I think we could probably sit and talk for 3 hours, right, about why this one is here or there, where does it need to be on the list. But I would encourage us to make sure that we've got.
And I think to the point you're making, Brian, hopefully I'm kind of tracking. I think, kind of based on the conversation we had, in the meeting prior to this, understanding, the potential opportunity to reevaluate the events grant program overall, does this scoring matrix here, garner some consideration as how we may want to look at, redoing the way we score events, and maybe this is at least a baseline or a starting point for further conversations as we go through, that process of evaluating our events grant program. Maybe this provides us a little bit more data, a little bit more insight into how we score and rank those. But I do think, to your point, there's a further conversation of the events and how this all plays together.
Well, and that
I
was
think,
really,
Brian, one other element that I think is inherent in what was just described is this is really an attempt to set a baseline for, again, alignment with future strategy. And it really is not meant to say good, bad, or ugly. It's really to set a baseline through criteria that we have developed that we can, I don't want to use the word is objective, but it is a sort of a common baseline. And then we've seen two things happen with this, where this, again, becomes that baseline against which future strategy is evaluated and how those impacts are going to happen. And also, we've been able to work with many destinations and develop their own criteria, so that if family-friendly event development is in the future as part of the strategy, that becomes part of the scoring criteria. Those are things that we hope are outcomes from this, but we will use this baseline to evaluate where we see opportunity for strategy, and then, again, hopefully use this to then implement that strategy.
Yeah. Let me add one other piece here, Brian, to your question. The other way to look at this, too, is each one of these events they have organizers, right? And to some degree, this also gives us a chance to actually proactively go to organizers and say, we really want to sit down with you because we want you to be successful. We want to have your event keep evolving. And it also gives us another vehicle to sit down with event organizers and work with them on how they're structuring their event, how they're looking at the future, how they're looking at programming. So it also gives us an avenue to proactively work with the event organizers going forward.
What qualifies these events to be on this list? Are they all associated with TDC dollars? Because I see some on here that have nothing to do with TDC dollars. So why would they?
No, that is not a criteria. That is not a criteria through which we do our evaluation. This is really starts first and foremost from a web-based analytics tool that we use to define events that are of a certain recognition online. I think the next opportunity, we have discussed this with Matt and Kelly, is to take that list of TDC-funded events and see where there is alignment, see where there is, again, strategic alignment, but also maybe whether our evaluation is different and creates a different set of criteria. So we have not done that through any basis of what TDC funds. We did this from a destination perspective.
No, I appreciate that clarification because that's, so you basically, did you look at our event grant proposals and score them? Or is this just you went out there on the, okay, so you just independently researched the events and created
Independently.
this list? Gotcha. That's
Yep.
making a lot more sense.
We
I
have a
was-
criteria data that shows, again, it's a kind of the same type of scoring mechanism that goes out and finds events that are really primarily promoted through the web, which we all know is a really important source of information for visitors. So we look at this really through the lens of a visitor and the way they look at things to do in a destination, rather than the very important process you have, which again we feel is a really, really dynamic, and not every destination has, another point of evaluations for the event strategy.
Yeah, and I think, Matt, just to go back to your point, is we've already kind of internally talked about this, is how do you take, you know, what's currently being done, you know, look at some of the criteria here and really kind of bring it all together is the goal. So as Scott mentioned, we want ultimately the outcome here to be, you know, what's the most effective from, you know, the, you know, Walton County's perspective, not necessarily, you know, so this really is meant to lead into an outcome, right? And so that's what we certainly plan on doing.
I just think it has a lot to do with the rating, and if it's not a TDC dollar, it should be off the charts. You know, it should be automatically, yeah, let's do this. We want more, and we want more events that people enjoy in, off, on the beach, in the beach.
Yeah.
And out of season, so I'm looking at the scoring here, the top two, and it's not a TDC dollar spent on, so they should be off the chart.
Yeah.
Songwriters Festival receives fund.
There's money that goes to the top line?
Well, when you say off the chart, though, do you mean, I mean, I thought you also meant off the chart, meaning let's keep making sure those organizers are happy, you know what I mean? Meaning, if we don't have to put resources in and they're delivering great outcomes, right? I mean, that's also a positive thing, I'm assuming, right?
I mean, it should be a gimme, you know, no TDC dollars, and they're doing something, you wanna, you know, have as many of them as you can.
Yeah,
Well,
I got you. Yep, absolutely.
This is Jennifer. I think what this example also does is it shines a light on the different types of events that we have and how the TDC could fund them in different ways. And I think that can be useful in the evaluation process, because there are
Yeah.
events that may not need seed funding, but are a great alignment with the TDC brand. So I appreciate this matrix.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it's- especially now understanding it's not related to our most recent discussions on event grants, it absolutely offers an enormous amount of perspective.
And again, our belief is that an event strategy should have some overriding philosophies, and one is looking at the scope and scale of what is available in the destination, TDC funded or not. That's a really important point of data that you can use to position and market the amount of and opportunities of things to do for people, but then also the strategy of where funding goes to. So we think both of those are very important points of evaluation that can be part of a future strategy, because they are both very, very impactful. The ones that are not being funded but do have impact, and how you make sure that, again, those are well-known, recognized, and continue to be a demand driver, and have a very, again, focused and strategic look at how the TDC is funding events as part of the overall event strategy for the destination.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, then the last part today is our public outreach. So our goal is to have this survey out in the market by the end of the week, and this will be, again, dispersed very broadly through multiple assets that both Walton County Tourism has, as well as key partners in the community. We have in-person public sessions that are slated for the first week of October. The recommendations of the team at Walton County Tourism is to have one of those in North Walton and at least 2 to 3 in South Walton, and that we will vary our sessions by time of day and location. And I think one of the most strategic parts of our public outreach is the demographic questions that we will have as part of the survey, so we can get some very good information on who is responding, where they're responding from, and are they related to the tourism industry in terms of employment. I don't know, Matt, if there's anything else you would want to add, or if there is any questions that any of the steering committee have.
Yeah, I would turn this over to the steering committee for their input. Thank you.
Well, this is Jennifer. Will we see the questions in the survey before they're public?
We can certainly get those to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think based on today's conversation, if there's any feedback there, I mean, we all collectively worked on the questions to see if we could, create ways to get people to really kind of give us their thoughts. Absolutely, I think that it'd be great to, more set of eyes in this case is always helpful.
And we will coordinate with Matt and team to make sure you see those survey questions. And again, we've worked very closely with Matt and the team in the development of these questions.
I guess the one
Great.
other question I would have
For our
is,
future meetings, we'll have a report on
Thanks,
our
Scott.
marketing audit that's going on.
Scott, can we pause? I think Amy had a question.
Final
Sorry.
presentation of the reserve policy.
Hold on a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There's some comment there?
oh, there was just a question relative to the in-person sessions. Will those be sessions that we can attend?
So as long as we publicly notice them, that more than one council member may be in attendance, that's certainly something that's open. So we kind of had an idea of how we wanted to set those up. So, in the initial way we were thinking about it was the idea of potentially doing a joint TDC, BCC group session. So then we can get all of you all plus the elected officials all in the same room. So we thought about doing that for one of the sessions and then having the other sessions where you all still could pop in because they would be publicly noticed, but also available just to the business community, the resident population, anybody who wanted to attend. But we did contemplate doing one that was specifically TDC and BCC.
I think that would be very good.
I also, Tiffany, have a question. I know a while back there was a mention that some of these meetings you would have to sign up ahead of time. We were trying to find locations based on the sizing of how many people you wanted. You didn't want overwhelmingly too much, but wanted a good, good sized group. Is there any more conversation to how that invitation structure will go for anyone who would like to attend?
Matt?
Yeah, so I think, the idea was to, try to do the pre-sign-up just to get an idea of attendance. But I think, what we understand is that's not going to be mandatory. So in terms of looking for locations, we're trying to identify places that, obviously kind of have different locations, so it makes it convenient for folks. So I think, ideally looking for, a location, east, central, west to kind of try and accommodate that to the best we can. So more than likely, we'll explore, probably some of the resort communities that have some larger conference spaces, and see, what those facilities may have availability on, because I think that's going to dictate, I think what we all understand is we don't have a lot of facilities with huge amounts of space, right, for the public, and also that are easy to navigate in and out of. So I think that's something we've got to drill down a little bit more on.
And so if we're looking, I'm guessing the first week of October for some of that week, so those will be decided, and I'm guessing giving a month leeway time, so here soon?
Yeah, I think that's really in the
Announced?
next couple weeks, we're going to have to really get those locations signed, sealed, and delivered. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we have found from our other work that asking the public to register, letting them know that we're, and trying to make sure we get the right size venue, is that it wouldn't necessarily be, if you don't sign up, you can't go, but it would be an expression of interest, so we have some sense of scale for those particular venues.
Great.
Okay, in the interest of time, moving along. So for our next steering committee, we'll have information on the marketing audit that was underway right now. We'll have the near final reserve policy presentation. Hopefully, we'll have had some additional impact from the survey. We can finalize the SWOT analysis, and then we'll also present our initial findings around the organizational and funding overview that was part of the response.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you all for great information. I think it was a much more productive session today. It was good to get it a little bit in advance, and so much appreciated. And if
Yeah.
I have a motion to adjourn,
Thanks, Dan. Thanks,
And-
Scott.
a second,
Thanks, everybody.
all in favor?
Great to see you. Great feedback. Very helpful.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. I did. She looks so pretty.
Because, you know, it's wedding time right now for the, over there.
That's her. Yeah, they're the two maids of honor. And then, sweet girl.